and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick, with the City of Hampton's Communications and Marketing Department. And today we're going to have a little bit of a history lesson. I have with me Sergeant Harry Quinton. Welcome. You are, and I'm going to say a former Tuskegee Airman, but I bet you don't consider yourself former. It is a lifetime title, right?
Yes, we look upon ourselves as being once a Tuskegee Airman, always a Tuskegee Airman.
Always a Tuskegee Airman. So tell us how you ended up getting into that organization. Well, not organization, but branch of the military.
Well, it started when I was in high school. I had heard about the program, but at the time I was so distant removed from it, and they said they were only taking college graduates. And
you would have been way too young.
Yeah, I had just finished high school, and I had a job at a drugstore.
And we're talking 1943.
1943.
Okay.
And the pharmacist who was the manager said to me, he said, "Harry, now that you finished high school, what are you going to do with your life?" I knew I was going to be drafted soon, and you really didn't know what you were going to do because the uncertainty of what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I think I'm going to Hampton Institute to study auto mechanics.
Okay.
And he said to me, Harry, he said, if you're going to be a mechanic, why don't you be the best, be the top, be an airplane mechanic? And that sort of struck me, because I didn't know of any black people working on airplanes.
Well, yeah.
I only knew about that program in Tuskegee, but I'm thinking, where would I go to study airplane mechanics? I never saw anybody at the local airfield of my color working on airplanes. I never even knew anybody.
It probably didn't even occur to you until he said that as an idea.
So but I knew what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd heard that from my high school principal and teachers say that you aim for the top, you dream big, hit your wagon to a star. So I started thinking, well, where can I find out about it? So I bought some flying magazines, aviation magazine, mm-hmm. and in one I saw there was a application for a school in Trenton, New Jersey, that you could study airplane mechanics. So I filled it out, and there was one question on there that asked you color, what color you were.
Wow.
And I figured, well, if I put colored, that's what we were designated as, that would give them an excuse to eliminate me. But to my surprise, I got a reply and it said I was accepted.
So you did put colored on there?
Oh yeah,
You had to, okay.
Yeah, but I was accepted. And the funny thing is, when they replied, it said, we have another colored gentleman here from the Virgin Islands, and you two should get along fine. Now, I didn't know how they would know that, but we did, and I still correspond with them to this day. And I was 17 years old, and I told my mother that's what I want to do, and she said, okay. And she worked 2 jobs so that we could get that tuition together.
Wow.
And I went to Trenton, and I finished the course. I took the civil aeronautics examination, and I received the license as a licensed airplane mechanic. Mm-hmm. So then I decided, well, I'm going to try to get into the program at Tuskegee, so I'll go take that cadet test. I took the cadet test, and they said my eyesight, depth perception, wasn't good enough to be a pilot.
To be a pilot, okay.
So I enlisted in the reserves, Army Reserves, and when I went in, they put me in the Air Corps, and that's how I was put into the program.
Now, I mean, the Tuskegee Airmen have gotten a lot of publicity in the past few years. I think people are sort of rediscovering the whole Greatest Generation, World War II. But at the time, what did you really know about the Tuskegee Airmen? I mean, was it already kind of famous and making headlines, or just a little bit of word of mouth within the African American community?
It was only making headlines in the black press.
The white press wasn't really paying attention.
If you wanted to read anything about black progress, you had to read it in the black press. Mm-hmm. And one of the newspapers foremost was the Pittsburgh Courier. And they were quite active in more or less agitating for civil rights, and at that time even integrating the armed forces.
Wow, that's an early voice to be speaking out. That's so bold.
Another activist was A. Philip Randolph, who was advocating, he was even advocating a march on Washington in 1943.
Wow.
To integrate the armed forces. So the information was from the black press.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So then you end up at Tuskegee?
I never.
You never went there?
Never touched Tuskegee.
Okay. So you're training.
They trained the pilots at Tuskegee, but the technical and support people they sent to the various Air Force technical schools. I was sent to the North American Aviation Plant in Inglewood, California, where they built the B-25s, because that's the plane that I was working on.
That's what you were going to be.
I was in the bomber group. So I spent 6 weeks there, becoming quite familiar with the B-25.
And then where did they send you? Where did you serve after that?
Well, my outfit, the 477, never went overseas, but we moved around because we had a problem with the commanding officer, Colonel Selway, he was more interested in keeping the group segregated. He wanted, his orders were that there be no mixing of the races. So he decreed that there would be a separate officers club for the black officers who were training, as opposed to the white officers who were being the instructors. And that created a situation where eventually the black officers refused to obey that order, and they went into the white officers club, and a number of them were arrested, and it finally ended up with 101 of them being arrested.
Oh, wow.
And we were moved from Godman Field, Kentucky to Freeman Field, Indiana, and back to Godman Field, and then to Lockbourne, Ohio. And what happened was Colonel Davis came back from Europe, and with a cadre of people from the 332nd Fighter Group, he was given command of our group, and all those other officers were relieved. Colonel Selway and his people were relieved of their duty. And there was a court-martial, but only 3 were actually court-martialed. One was given a dishonorable discharge because he had pushed the provost marshal when he entered the club. Two others were fined $150, and the others were, a letter of reprimand was put in a file, and those letters remained in their files until President Clinton said they should all be removed, and the person who was court-martial, he was pardoned and reinstated.
And that's really when the white public became aware of the contributions of the Tuskegee Airmen, I think. Is it, it was a little bit known at the time.
Well, I think when the HBO movie was made, we got some acknowledgement. And really, I think our biggest recognition was when we were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal.
Right.
And about 300 of us went to Washington.
Did you go to Washington for that?
Yes.
What was that like for you?
Well, that was a great moment because I never thought, you see, when I came home back from the war was over, nobody knew anything about Tuskegee. Very few people knew anything about Tuskegee Airmen. Some of the pilots applied for jobs as pilots and they were turned down. I applied for work as a mechanic. I was rejected. I couldn't get a job as a mechanic.
Really? Even with your certification and your military experience, you still couldn't get a job?
I was sent to a job by the State Employment Agency in New Jersey. They said there was an opening there. I had all the qualifications. When I got there, the foreman said, "Oh yeah, I'll hire you. It's all right, you can work here, but you have to meet the manager." He took me in to meet the manager, and the manager looked me in the face, right in the eye, and said, "Well, the job is cleaning toilets." So.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So I just decided that I would have to give up that field. And since I had the GI Bill.
After your mom had worked 2 jobs to get your tuition, to get your training, and you had all this military experience, you had to leave the field because you couldn't get a job in the civilian world.
So I had the GI Bill, and I went to, I enrolled in college, and I ended up getting a degree in business administration and accounting. And eventually, even then, getting a job wasn't too easy.
I bet.
But I finally got a decent job with the U.S. Treasury Department as an Internal Revenue agent. And I retired from there. So, but we didn't get a lot of recognition.
There was no hero's welcome, no parade when you came back from the service.
No. As I said, when I came home, I was just another colored boy. That's so not that I had done a great thing, but you'd served, and done your best, and worked on planes, and yet you came back to the life you'd left, even though you were changed. The people around you had not. We expected things to be different because
you'd proven.
We had fought just like everybody else. In fact, we fought for the right to fight.
Right, you had to fight 2 battles.
Yeah.
You had to fight in order to fight in the war.
That's true.
All of you did.
That's true.
Now, you guys, when you said once a Tuskegee Airman, always a Tuskegee Airman, you go out and speak a lot, and there are other members of the local group who are very active. Why do you want to tell your story, particularly to kids? What do they need to hear? What is your message to them?
Well, they need to know that, first of all, you have to prepare yourself. You have to finish school, get an education. You can never get too much education. And even if you don't go to school, you can still educate yourself. But there are great opportunities available today, and you have to be prepared to take advantage of it. Opportunities that don't knock every day, but when they do knock, you have to be ready to step it up. So that's the number one thing, is to be prepared. And to prepare yourself, you have to be educated. And then the other thing is how you live your life. You can't abuse your body. You should first of all, stay away from drugs. You don't want to get involved with drugs, because those things will kill you or leave you in a state where you're of no value to yourself or anybody else. So those are two things that I would say to the young people today, that it's a changing world, that are not the type of jobs that used to exist in this country anymore. You pick up anything you pick up, it was made somewhere else. So we don't have those manufacturing jobs here. Everything else is either service or technical. And everybody can't do those jobs. Everybody's not going to be a technician or a professional person.
Right, right.
So we have to have jobs here that people that are semi-skilled can do.
How do you feel like your service and the service of other people in the Tuskegee Airmen and in some of the other groups that haven't even gotten quite as much attention as them, the Marines group and some of the other very early black officers in World War II, how do you feel like that moved the military and even the country forward?
Well, I think the reason why the Tuskegee Airmen got so much recognition because we weren't the only blacks that were in the service and doing some outstanding things. It was because at that time, aviation was the epitome of, that was the top. And
right, absolutely.
Yeah, and being a fighter pilot was, that
it's like a superstar, like,
yeah,
like an astronaut today, maybe.
Right, being a fighter pilot. And the War Department had made a study. Now, I don't know where they did their research, but they came out with a study which they used at the War College to teach officers, white officers, that blacks were inferior people, that they were cowards, that they were unable to handle difficult machinery, and that we would never be fit for combat. We would only be able to do the menial work.
Right.
So as a result of that, most blacks, when they were drafted, they were put in like the port battalion, which was loading and unloading ships, or driving trucks, or working in supply. It was only a few that were in other positions, like in regular combat. So when you had a group of blacks flying airplanes as fighter pilots, well, that was just something that nobody in their right mind would think, how can they do that? And we all knew that. I knew that they didn't think that I could work on an airplane. And if I did work on it, then it wasn't going to get up in the air.
Right, okay.
Right? So we all knew that. We had electricians, we had radio technicians, parachute riggers. All those jobs were jobs that we didn't ordinarily do, and which they didn't think we could do it. And we were determined to show that we could do it.
And you did. I mean, I think that was the big success, and it was probably not covered well at the time and not publicized, but it was a fact. And it became harder and harder to overlook those contributions. And if you'd been in the military, 10 or 15 years later, I think it still would have been a struggle, but your experience probably would have been very different because you guys did break that ground. You broke through those barriers.
Yeah, I think that incident in the Air Force, I spoke about the officers being arrested, they call that the Freeman Field mutiny. And altogether, 160 of those officers were arrested.
Wow.
And some historians say that had a great deal to do with integrating the armed forces.
So you were a part of that. And many people, like, not you personally, you did not do the protest.
I wasn't one who got arrested, but I was there in the midst of all this furor that was going on.
Well, thank you. I mean, really, thank you for your contribution to the service. Thank you for your contribution to moving this country a little bit more toward integration. I know it took many, many years, and that you personally didn't benefit from it, at least not right away. But thank you for your hard work, and thank you for coming by today to share your story, because I think it's important that we continue to tell these stories to young people, to people my age who weren't around to witness your contribution.
Well, thank you for inviting me here today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for watching this episode of Round Robin.